Early one morning in January of 1955, 25-year-old Carl Gilbert struggled to stay awake as he drove down a dark highway in rural Kansas. So Carl was a recruiter, and so it was his job to drive around to different universities to try and recruit graduating seniors for his company. And so Carl yawned and drank some more coffee, and he could just feel his eyes getting heavier and heavier, and then at some point, he closed his eyes for what he wanted to be just for like a second, but it just felt like he couldn't quite open them again. And as he's sort of like blinking for this really long extended blink, he hears a voice in the car. He's all alone in his car. It's the middle of the night. He's by himself, but he hears a voice right behind him yell into his ear, "Guy, look out!" Carl, after hearing the voice, jolted upright. He opened his eyes and he realized he hadn't just blinked. He had fallen asleep at the wheel and was now speeding toward a concrete marker on the side of the highway. And so he grabbed the steering wheel and he yanked it just in time so that he only sideswiped the marker instead of a head-on collision, which almost certainly would have killed him. Later that morning, Carl sat at a diner just a few miles down the road, eating some breakfast and reading the morning paper. Carl still felt very rattled from nearly getting into a very likely fatal car accident. But even more than just the fact that he nearly died, Carl now was thinking a lot about that voice that had yelled in his ear and essentially saved him from smashing into the concrete marker. But what really stood out to him was that this voice had not called him Carl. The voice had said, "Guy, watch out." And Guy was not his name. But Carl actually had a childhood friend named Peter who called him Guy as a nickname. He was like the only person who called Carl Guy. And as Carl thought about this voice, he started to think that the sound of the voice really sounded an awful lot like Peter. Now, keep in mind, what Carl is actually thinking is like his subconscious has like channeled a voice to save himself. But he's just thinking to himself, why wouldn't it be like my mom coming in and saving my life if it's my subconscious doing it? Why Peter? Like Peter was so random if that's what it was. Carl and Peter had kind of drifted apart as they grew up. And so ultimately, Carl just went back to eating his breakfast and reading the newspaper. But when he flipped the page over and looked at the headline of the next page, he froze. The news story was actually about Carl's childhood friend, Peter. Peter had just died in this horrific military training accident. Specifically, he had died in a crash just hours before Carl heard the sound of some man's voice saying, "Guy, look out." The only person that ever called Carl Guy was Peter. And so Carl could never explain how or why any of this happened. But what he always believed is that in death, his friend Peter saved his life.